I want to put some context on that, and then I want to ask another question. But those of you, I like to do show of hands. How many people here have benefited from any financial aid associated with higher education? And I can say I have. Okay. Now, I'm going to ask several more questions, but spoiler alert, every single thing I'm going to ask is directly related to whether our census shows our true number of people, which is to say, more funds will be devoted towards these public systems if everyone is counted, and less will be devoted to these systems if some of you all are not counted, or some of your friends or family members are not counted. So financial aid, one. How many people make use of the roads in Michigan? Okay, another great reason to get counted. How many people have strong feelings about whether we should have national health care or not, one way or another? How many have strong feelings about whether the abortion issue? How many have any feelings whatsoever about where firearms should be allowed in society and whether firearms should not be allowed? Every single one of these issues are dramatically affected by how many people are counted in this census. What Representative Hammoud said was that the popular vote in the Michigan House of Representatives went to his party, the Democrats, and that there are less Democrats than Republicans in that House. What he's saying is, if you take everyone who voted for a representative in the Michigan House, and if you live in Dearborn, you get to vote for the seat that Representative Hammoud occupies now. But wherever you live, Ron, you probably vote for a different person, a different seat. And if you took all those votes and counted them all throughout the state, those that voted for Republicans and those that voted for Democrats, what Representative Hammoud was saying is that there was a majority, more people voted for Democrats. But there are more Republicans that hold those seats. And if you don't understand why that is, it's not easy to understand. If you don't understand why that is, then think about gerrymandering. And that issue is something you're going to be able to deal with and look at as a result of your census, because it's going to count who is where in our state. So that's a good segue to another question. I'll start with you, Ron, and then we'll go to Commissioner Baydoun. And because I have to pass the mic, you'll always go third, so you'll have the chance to think about your answers, Representative. A lot of people that I talk to, particularly in immigrant communities, Ron and Sam, have some concerns about giving information to the government. And, you know, the United States government, through the executive branch of government, has recently changed and made strong statements about the federal government's view of people from certain countries. And I've heard some citizens and residents worry about, should I tell the federal government where I live? Will they build a file on me? Will they use it against my family members? And so there's some concern about telling the government who you are and where you are based on the census. What do you think when you hear those concerns, and what can we as leaders do to allay or mitigate or reduce those concerns?
So I'm going to give you the answer from the position of a white male of privilege. So I'm going to give you the easy answer, and then you two gentlemen can give them the tough answer, and I think you'll see how they both fit together. The easy answer, folks, is in this country, in a democracy, numbers equal power. Numbers equal power. So the more people who sign that form who are immigrants, the more people who sign that form who are the children of immigrants, more people who sign that form who are sympathetic with immigrants, who realize that this country is only great because we are an immigrants nation, the more people who sign that form who feel like you do, the easier it is going to be to wipe the hate from the face of our politics. So it's easy for me to say. I know it's hard for you to do, so could one of you gentlemen take it from there?
Yes, this is a country of immigrants, and this is what made this country the greatest country on the face of the planet, the immigrants from all over the world. And there's a lot of fear out there, President Cavalluna. I have talked to a lot of people, and they are afraid to fill out the census. They think that the government is going to track them and they can come knock on their doors. People who are not documented could face deportations. But one thing that's reassuring is it's the law. The law says that once they are done counting, according to Title 13 of the census law, they cannot reveal the census forms for 72 years. And the people who are working in the census, they do background checks on them and criminal background checks on them, and there's damages if they leak any information. But the damage is done. There's been an attempt in the last few years when they tried to put the question of the citizenship on the census. It was directed at minority groups, at immigrants, because they don't want these groups and minorities to be counted. And my message would be, to all of you, especially the students here, talk to your parents and talk to your neighbors and your friends. Do not be afraid. The information is protected. They're not going to be knocking on their doors and asking them questions. I would really urge everyone not to be afraid. Just fill out the form, and we are protected by this law of secrecy for 72 years.
Commissioner, one question and then Representative, I'd like you to make comments. Do you have to be a citizen to fill out a census form?
You don't have to be a citizen. In 1980, I was a green card holder when I was 17 years old when I filled out the census. Even non-immigrants, non-documented immigrants can fill out the census because there's no question on the census that says, are you a U.S. citizen or a resident alien? Also, by the way, and I'm going to put my real estate hat on here for a moment, a lot of the people who are renting, many of them, they'll say, well, I'm renting here, I'm going to be staying in this home for a year or 2 years. Why bother? It's very important, even if you are a tenant, to fill out the census form. It doesn't mean that you have to own a home in order for you to fill out the census.
So Ron reminded me of a very important point, and that was that the census data has never been leaked before. So I think that precedent should give us some confidence. And this question is actually the first question I asked Kerry in our meeting with legislators, saying, how can we provide confidence to our residents that the information will not be leaked? The reality is as follows. Immigrant communities will not be under any more attack than they already are if you complete the census, or any less. The current administration is not friendly to anybody who has a name that sounds anything close like my name. I'm a little bit paler than a lot of folks who are Arab American and Muslim American. But if you are brown, black, immigrant, documented or undocumented, the reality is we are under attack. Now, there are several reports where CBP, Border Patrol, TSA, has had notice that if you are of a specific type of Muslim, to be stopped at the border coming into this country. If you are going back and forth to Canada, you're going to get a little more harassment if you look a little different or sound or have a different sounding name. Those attacks will not stop when we complete the census, and they're not going to increase or decrease when we complete the census. But to Ron's point, if we complete the census, we have a tool to combat this hate. The census provides you an opportunity to ensure that we have congressional voices in DC, and they ensure that we have fairness in our elections as it pertains to state house and state senate. And I can't emphasize how important those voices are to make sure that those voices accurately represent us, who we are, and what we stand for. But that can't be done if we're too afraid to step out and complete the census form, which again has a precedent of never being leaked before. And so I know myself and Sam, as well as President Cavaluna, working with Kerry, working with Zainab Hussein, are utilizing our networks, are putting our faces out there, our stamps of approval, if you will, to say that we are here to be ambassadors of the census. To tell you to have trust in us. If you don't trust the federal government, we're not asking you to. But have faith in those who are advocating for completion of the census. Because we're here to represent you, we're not here to fool you. And have confidence that we will do our best to ensure that a worst case scenario never happens where census information is leaked. And that is something that I can promise you here today that we fight for day in and day out. Thank you.
Let me just put it another way. Again, I know it's easy for me to say, but you have a choice to either ignore the census form because of the hate or sign the form and stand up to the hate.
Thank you, Ron. That's And I just want to add a couple of comments myself on this to clarify it for anyone who will be. I expect most of you all have are what we call we're preaching to the choir. I assume most of you plan to sign the census form and identify yourself as a resident here. But what I'm hoping to give you as you leave is information to talk to your colleagues, your friends, your family. And one of the things I want to say is when we're talking about leaking census information, what these panelists are saying is that the Census Bureau is a government entity. And when they say leak, they don't mean just leak to maybe a newspaper. We're talking about leaking to any other part of the government. And those other parts of the government are the ones that I hear citizens and residents say, I'm worried about those parts of the government coming and hurting me or my family, or I don't mean hurting physically, I just mean the worry about that. The leak that we're talking about is leaking that information beyond the Census Bureau. And I can promise you, the Census Bureau is not the group that comes and asks you whether you should be deported. That's not their job. The Census Bureau is not the one who asks about how many people are living in a house for city code purposes, or even for investigating potential crimes. Those groups are different than the Census Bureau. One question that comes up often when I'm talking to young people about the census is just logistics. How often does it happen? Why isn't it required? Why are we even talking about this? I mean, we've talked, and I'm going to throw this out to any of the panelists, and then we'll do one question after this because we're wrapping up. But what are some just little known facts about the census that would help individuals know about it? Does it happen every other year? Representative Hammoud said we get 1 year to look at it, but how often does that happen, and why does it happen, and maybe some historical context. Any comments on that from any of you all?
I will say this. Ron alluded to it earlier. The reason it's $675 billion of funding and that everybody is competing for, it happens every 10 years. And for the next 10 years, we are shaping our future here in the state of Michigan when it comes to getting this money from the federal government. I want to give you and illustrate this example, Mr. Cavalluna, President Cavalluna, about the importance of filling out the census. We are currently in the city of Dearborn dealing with the Miller Bridge, which is on the south end of Dearborn. That bridge is going to cost $50 million. Wayne County just applied for a grant. We will be going to Washington in the next couple months to lobby the Department of Transportation for the grant because the state of Michigan does not have the money and the county does not have the money. So just think about this. We will most likely be competing against other cities that are asking for a similar grant. And they're going to be looking at these cities and the demographics and the needs and the population. That point illustrates how important it is to fill out the census form. If you're going to ask for money from the federal government, they want to see what do you want to use it for and how many people live in your district and in your community. One last thing I want to say. One of the best ways to trump bigotry and hate, literally, is to fill out the census form and sign it.
Just a couple more examples of how the census affects your daily life. If you've ever been a victim of a natural disaster, or you might be a victim of a natural disaster, the way emergency response officials prepare and respond to natural disasters are based on census data. If you've ever called 911 or might have to call 911, the way the mapping is done by every 911 agency in this country to determine where to go and how to get there is based on census data. If you've ever researched your ancestors in this country or might want to research your lineage in this country, that's all census data, all the genealogy census data. There's just so many ways that, one last one is flu virus that's going around. If it comes to this country, if we have a severe outbreak, God forbid a pandemic, the way health officials respond to health emergency is based on census data. So it's available in the big ways we've been talking about, but it's also touches your daily life in ways that you couldn't imagine.
I guess I'll just speak to it from a logistical standpoint. As alliterated to it, it happens once every 10 years. And the majority of those who complete the census will actually fill it out from when it's mailed to them and returned. But then we have what are known as hard-to-count communities. And that's where being an enumerator or essentially a door knocker comes in hand. And so you mobilize folks from the community to go out and count these hard-to-count communities or individuals who have not returned the census form. What are some of those hard-to-count communities? The homeless population, the undocumented population, communities of color, immigrant communities, communities in lower-income neighborhoods. These are all communities where they are less likely to return via mail and would require more of a mobilization effort to go back out there and either confirm what has been sent in or to encourage the completion of the form to be sent in.
Okay, so the last question I want to ask, I hope will be informed by one more show of hands. How many, by show of hands, have ever contemplated doing some type of public service? All right, keep your hand up if you've ever contemplated running for office yourself. Okay, and how about raise your hand if you've ever been unhappy with some public servant. Okay. Now, so the reason I ask that question is because what I hope is that you all, and I think it's a pretty safe assumption that your presence here today shows that you are, but I hope you're interested in public service, either because you believe that it's useful for our society or because you may even think of yourself as being a public servant now or possibly running to be one or serve one. And I'll just be very candid. I hope that you try to do that. I think there are innumerable good benefits to you thinking about that and doing it. If you work for a public representative like I have, if you run for public office like I never have, but some that are braver than me have, if you do those things, you will become more involved, more educated, and a better citizen. And that's not to say if you don't do that, you're a lesser citizen. I just say it just is such a wonderful thing for a person, particularly you young people, to think about. So that's my pitch on thinking about public service. And there are many, many ways to serve the public. But what I'm interested in is each of you all giving your thoughts about, and maybe a short pitch to the majority of our folks here are younger people who are in college. And frankly, when I was that age, I was more open to the kind of pitch I'm asking you to consider. What is it that you could offer to them to suggest, maybe to support my argument, which is think about public service for yourself or someone around you and why there's value, because it's not easy. It takes time, it takes money, it takes open criticism of your position. But why should people consider that?
I can speak to you from my experience. I'm still in the private sector, but I'm also an elected official. There comes a point in your life where you have to give back. You have to give back to your community. If you want to make a difference, you run for public office. You stay involved, you get involved, you register people to vote. You help people fill out the census if they have any questions, especially if there's a language barrier. And by the way, I want to take this opportunity here and say to the Arabic-speaking residents in the city of Dearborn, and I don't know if they're watching us live or they can see this at one point. If they need any help, I am available, and the county has people that are bilingual that they can help them with this. Do not be afraid to ask questions. So my message to you, to the young aspiring public servants here, please stay involved. Make sure people register to vote and give back. The only way we can make a difference and we keep moving forward is by serving our communities and making sure that what we're doing is going to help our communities. One final thought. This country was made great. This country is already great, and it will become even greater because of the contributions of all of you, the young generation here in this country, especially the immigrants. We come here for a purpose. We left our countries because the opportunities that this country gave us, we did not have I did not have the opportunity to play soccer and get a scholarship and get a higher education in Lebanon. I did it here, and this is my country, and we need to do whatever it takes to keep this country moving, and that means stay involved.
So I've given a lot of thought, written a lot, and given a lot of speeches about our times and your generation. We live in a time of unprecedented change. At least we haven't seen this kind of change in at least 12 decades, where you have a huge economic transition on top of a huge demographic change, on top of huge technological change. We haven't seen this kind of technological change since the beginning of the last century. We haven't seen this kind of economic transition since the beginning of the last century. We haven't seen this kind of demographic change since the beginning of the last century. And what happens in change like this is a couple things. One is our institutions don't adapt as quickly as we're forced to adapt and change, so we lose faith in them. And you know this, you feel it in your gut, and I'm sure you've seen the polls where the public's trust in every institution, every social institution that separates us from anarchy, that holds us together, we don't trust as much as we did. Everything from the presidency to the Boy Scouts to bankers to priests to small businesses, big businesses, name your social institution, and there's been a collapse of trust because all these changes from technology to the economy to the demography are forcing us to change as people much quicker than the institutions can adapt. The other thing that comes out of times like this, that came out of the time like this at the beginning of the last century, that came out of a time like this just before the Civil War and about the founding of the country. Every few generations, we have a time like this with all this change. And what happens is the people who were born and raised in that time of change, the young people who were raised in times when the public lost trust in institutions and when things were changing too fast for the adults and their institutions to handle, those generations rewrote the rules of our society. Those are the generations that have gone down in history. Those are the greatest generation. And I've written, and I still firmly believe, that you guys have the makings of being the next greatest generation. But only if you decide to push us out and take over, and I say us by me, as people my age, and demand better from your politics, demand better from your businesses, demand better from your religious organizations and from your fraternal organizations. Take them over, blow them up, and create new rules and new institutions for a better America. It's only going to happen if you guys take charge.
I can't say blow them up on a microphone.
No, I thought of that.
Your name is up.
Again,
Yeah, right.
privilege, right?
It's totally fine. You know, I think around 1 o'clock, I'm giving a speech as to how I got into public service. And so, you know, I won't spoil how or why I got in. But public service is this idea that there's something bigger than myself. That I can go out there and I can succeed as an individual, but my success as an individual does not necessarily mean that my community succeeds. Public service is the opposite. It's getting out there and ensuring that my community succeeds. And I know if my community succeeds, it will certainly bring me up as well. That's what public service is. For any of those that put up their hand for wanting to get involved in public service, I'll offer it to you right now. If you shoot me an email, I don't care what your grades are, I don't care how old you are, what program you're in, we will welcome everybody as an intern or fellowship. We have one of the most robust interns and fellowships in all of Lansing. And if you don't want it to be a policy fellowship in Lansing, if you don't want to see the Capitol and see how that works, we're happy to give you a grassroots organizing fellowship right here in your local area. So I'll offer that, and it's up to you at that point to just submit an email, a Facebook message. Don't Instagram DM me or Snapchat me. I take Twitter or Facebook. Those are the two that I'll offer in addition to email. But public service, for me, became my purpose. And it's a higher calling. I'm a person who holds faith very near and dear to my heart, and it has shaped my life. And public service has opened up more doors than I could ever have imagined. And if you are the type of individual that likes to inspire others, if you're the type of individual that loves to see others succeed, if you love to help, If that is something that makes you content with life, then I think that is something that you should try to pursue. And there's various number of avenues of public service. It's not necessarily meaning you have to run for office. Doesn't mean you have to be a part of a campaign. There are so many opportunities to give back. You just have to find the one that resonates true to your heart and then give it 150%, even when everyone is standing against you saying it can never be done. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all three of you. I'm going to let Dr. Perry come up, or one of his colleagues to designate how we're going to transition the panels, but just thank you all. Please join me in thanking these panelists, and we'll move to the next panel very quickly.
It was an honor sitting down with you. Look forward to talking to you in the future. Yes, let's do that. Yeah. Good job. I think they want to take it. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Just make sure it works.
Oh, this is the front panels. I'm gonna grab that one.
Yeah, it's not running right now. It's running. I just can't hear the audio. Can you hear it now?
It was, yeah. I don't know exactly. I thought the same, exactly the same thing. It's live.
Do the video. I can't get the audio. Good afternoon. Thank you for your patience through a bit of a technical difficulty. I'm Jim Martinez. I'm Director of Communications for the Wayne County Executive Office, Wayne County Executive Warren Evans. And we give another hand for our great panel today. You know, Commissioner Baydoun, Ron Fournier, a nationally renowned journalist, and came back home for run his PR shop, and then Rep Hammoud. There's not a harder worker for you in the state legislature than Rep Hammoud. If I could just kind of make a quick plug for public service, the panel before me talked about public service, and they really focused on running for office and being an elected official. I would tout the other aspect of public service. If you have ambitions to run for office, please absolutely do. We need more intelligent people engaged. If you're paying attention to the rhetoric at all or the discourse, we need more active, diverse people sharing their perspectives and their life experiences, because you bring who you are to that office. And you had some great examples of that at the panel before. But the other aspect of public service is the non-elected side. And that's kind of where I come in, and a lot of the folks on this panel come in. There is a whole lot of public service to be done. If you don't want to run and put your face on a campaign poster, if you don't want to put your family out there to run for elected office, there is so much work to be done to make the government operate and serve people. What Executive Evans always says is, good government is people serving people, people serving their neighbors. And so in my role at Wayne County, we were going to show you a video that my team created, but we communicate and get the information out to residents and share information, whether it's about health department, roads, bridges, food stamps, nutrition assistance, all these services that are impacted by the census. There's so many aspects of public service. I appreciate you thinking about public service. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I was in college. All I could do was I could write. So every night before something was due, I would sit down and make stuff up, and got pretty good grades. And hence now I'm in public relations. This next panel, in their own right, great public servants. We wanted you to hear kind of the broad perspective of the census and what it is coming around every 10 years and the count. But the folks that you have on the stage now are really the tacticians, the experts. They're the folks who are in charge of delivering a complete count for the state of Michigan and their respective areas, including the city of Detroit. And they are really the leaders for the state in the engagement efforts. And the panel you saw before really outlined what's at stake for Michigan, what's at stake for Wayne County, what's at stake for the city of Detroit, and what's at stake for you and your neighbors for the census. So we're lucky today to have Haig Oshagan, and we're moving from my right to left across the stage. He's the founder and director of the New Michigan Media Partnership, and associate professor of media studies at Wayne State University. We've got Vicky Kavari, who is running Mayor Duggan in the city of Detroit's 2020 census campaign. We have got Carrie Ebersole, make sure I have my order right, the executive director of the 2020 census for Governor Whitmer in the entire state of Michigan. And then we have got my colleague and friend, Daniel Baxter, the director of external affairs for the Wayne County Executive. Please join me in giving a hand to our panel. And I'll just start real quick by letting each panelist kind of give you a real quick snapshot of who they are, a little bit of background, and then what they're doing. And then the goal of the panel is really to take a deep dive into, what the city, what the county, what the state, and what our media partners and nonprofits are doing to ensure a complete count, and then also hopefully provide you some information on how you can get involved. So I'll start with you.
Yeah. Thank you, first of all, Jim, for inviting me. So my name is Haigo Shagan. I'm a professor at Wayne State, but also founder of New Michigan Media. New Michigan Media is a unique, only in Michigan, partnership of the largest ethnic minority media in this region, the largest Arabic paper, the Arab American News, the largest Jewish paper, the Jewish News, the largest Asian paper, Michigan Korean Weekly, the largest African American paper, the Michigan Chronicle, and the largest Jewish paper, the Jewish News. Beyond the five, there are about 150 ethnic minority media across the state of Michigan. And we have connections with all of them. We know each one, we've connected with them. The availability of this network is unique here. No other state has this kind of connection and list and contacts. The connection with the census is that for almost all minorities, it matters who gives you the message about the census. If it's not a trusted source, if it's not someone that you know or trust, it doesn't matter what someone says about the census, about its confidentiality, about you participating, about how it affects and helps our communities. And one of the trusted sources for minority and ethnic communities is their ethnic and minority media, the publisher, the radio host, the online service. And so the state approached New Michigan Media and asked us to leverage our connections across the state to use ethnic and minority media to pass on the message of the census, to write editorials, and to be the voice that reaches a lot of the population, the voice that says the census is safe, you should do it, it helps all of us. And so we've leveraged, and I guess we'll talk about this more, but we've leveraged our connections with the 110 right now that we're actually working with to do outreach for the census for the state.
Daniel?
Hello, my name is Daniel Baxter. I'm the Director of External Affairs for Wayne County. In addition to that, I lead Wayne United to ensure that all jurisdictions within Wayne County, with the exception of the city of Detroit, because they have a tremendous team over there, but I'm responsible to ensure that every jurisdiction provides a complete count for our particular community. I think that it's really essential that we understand that as it pertains to the census, it's critical that each and every one of us engage. The one thing that we try to do is make sure that each one of our jurisdictions have a complete count commission. Those individuals are elected officials, folk in your community, people that you can trust, people that when information comes to them, whether or not you trust the government or not, because of them, because they're sharing that information with you, that you might be able to fill out that questionnaire that has 9 questions that will bring home the bacon for our community here in Wayne County. That's my main thrust, that's my main objective, is to guarantee that Wayne County has a complete count.
Carrie?
I think it's a good afternoon now. My name's Carrie Ebersol. I'm the Executive Director of the 2020 Census on behalf of the Governor. My capacity in this role is the Governor also appointed a 60-person committee that's representative of a number of constituencies from business, nonprofits, community groups, businesses, geographies from around the state. And together we've created a goal that we want to push forward around the census on the self-response rate, which we can talk more about through this session. But the state work really boils down into 4 buckets, if you will. One is the regional work. You know, the nonprofits are being mobilized around the state. You have the U.S. Census Bureau, who has staff around the state, as well as the constituency work. And lastly, mobilizing state government we obviously have a ton, we have 48,000 employees around the state on top of a number of offices that can be utilized to help promote and engage folks on filling out the census form. I would say, excuse me, and my voice is a little raspy today, but prior to this capacity, I've been fortunate to work on a number of advocacy issues over the last 20 years and work for a number of elected officials. I'm very proud to have been a part of their work. And I could say, as already mentioned in launching this panel, there's a lot of ways to be involved in your community and be involved in public service. And one way is definitely a part of the census work, and this is definitely mobilizing to be a historic effort here in Michigan.
Thanks, Carrie. Hello, everybody. Vicky Kovari, and my title is the Executive Director of the Detroit 2020 Census Campaign. Before that, I spent 5 years as the General Manager of the Detroit Department of Neighborhoods, and in that role, we had a team of folks that were assigned to groups of neighborhoods that really helped to improve the quality of life and build leadership in the neighborhoods and really helped rebuild the trust between the neighborhoods and local government. So for the last 35 years, I've been a community organizer. So I've worked a lot in neighborhoods. I've worked a lot of political campaigns. So from the time I graduated from college, sort of sitting where you are now, till today, organizing has been my passion and my vocation. So that's what led me to this job, to try to organize the city of Detroit to turn out and participate in the 2020 census. And our goal basically is that we have to increase the number of people who fill out the form. We have to increase the self-participation in the census on the part of the city of Detroit. Because 10 years ago, it was abysmal in terms of participation. So we want to get up there above 70% of all households filling out the census form, and because you could use your help and a bunch of other people's help. So thank you for inviting me to be here today.
Thanks, Vicki. And for those of us who aren't familiar with the term complete count, or this is the first time we're really diving into the census, Carrie, if you could kind of just take a crack at, defining the complete count, what it means and why it's important. And other panelists obviously jump in as you see fit.
Counting everyone that lives in Michigan. That's my definition of a complete count.
There it is.
Vicki, what does a complete count look like, Vicki, for the city of Detroit?
Well, our goal is to get it above 70% of all the households in Detroit to fill out the census. Now you think, well, that's kind of a low goal because that means 30% of the people don't. But in 2010, we had 64% of the people participate. We would love to be up near 90 or even 100, but we know who we are, and we want the people to know. I want you to know that the census is for everyone, right? It doesn't matter what your immigration status is, or your age, or your race, or if you live under a bridge or in a 4-bedroom colonial. You are counted regardless of any of that, all right? Every person living, eating, sleeping in the United States is counted in the census. And that's our goal, is to make sure everyone knows that the census counts everyone. And that we are able to educate everyone about why it matters and motivate them to fill out that form.
Yeah, let me add to that too. It doesn't matter if you're here on F1 visa as a foreign student or an H-1B visa for a skilled worker. If you live here, you count for the census. The only people who don't count for the census are people who are visiting here as tourists and are going to go back. If you are here and you're living here, you count. I can tell you my own story. I'm Armenian, born in Lebanon. My aunt came to Los Angeles, where my family is, on a visitor's visa. Her visa expired, but she had enough money and we had family, and so she bought a condo and stayed. Obviously, not legally. Her visa had expired. She counts for the census. When the census comes to her address, because census doesn't know who you are, it just comes to your door, it just comes to whoever is living at an address, she needs to fill out the census and turn it back. It doesn't matter if you are a citizen, non-citizen, whatever visa status you have, you should count. And if you sublet your house to someone else, you should count those people who are subletting your house or a room in your house. Everyone who's living in a residence should count for the census.
And I think if you can build on that a little bit specifically for students, I'm sure there's questions about how to complete the census form if you're a student, whether you live with your parents, live elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's only 9 questions. It takes literally 10 minutes. Everyone has to fill out the same 9 questions. And it will ask you what your name is. So you will know what your name is, the census, and what address you live in. But everyone who lives in the same residence should fill the census out. There's one group that gets overcounted for the census. Anyone guess what group gets overcounted on the census? Who? No, legal immigrants don't get overcounted. There's one group within Americans who gets overcounted. If the census comes to an address, those people who have more than one address get more than one census form delivered. And so the overcount is on the wealthier Americans who tend to be white as well. And the census tries to adjust that to fix the overcount on that category. So if you have a house up northern Michigan, you'll get a census there. Our job is to make sure that those who usually don't get counted do get counted. And all of us are in the same effort. You also will help us in the same effort, I hope, once we are done with the talk today.
Thanks. Daniel, will you talk a little bit about Wayne County's efforts and some of the obstacles to getting a complete count for the 42 communities plus Detroit that we're working with?
So one of the challenges in terms of obtaining a complete count are those groups of individuals who are hard to count. That's children, 5 years of age or younger, senior citizens, minorities, and immigrants. That's a tremendous challenge simply because of the demographics that they live in. Most people, most communities that are properly counted are those communities that are middle class, have higher education rates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But communities like Detroit, Hamtramck, Highland Park, Inkster, Dearborn, communities where there are a higher number of minorities and poverty rates, those are the communities that have the tremendous challenges. So what Wayne County has been doing is working vigorously with those 10 communities that are typically underrepresented to make sure that they receive funding, make sure that they receive all of the information, make sure that they're properly equipped to be aggressive in ensuring that each one of those communities are completely counted. One thing that we endeavored to do last week, we had this big rally, a census and voter registration rally similar to this at Wayne County Community College, where we had more than 500 students participating in that particular process and swearing or vowing that they will go back to their various schools and communities to ensure that those communities understand the importance of the census and participate in the census. Is Jeremy around? Jeremy, stand up on the stage. Jeremy has this shirt on. It's a pretty cool shirt. Any of you know Tommy Walker is the founder of Detroit Versus Everybody. Tommy Walker donated approximately 200 shirts for every student ambassador who was sworn in to make sure that everybody is counted in all of the schools within Wayne County. And each one of those ambassadors received one of those shirts. And it says what? Read it. Let me hear you. One more time. Everybody counts. We have to make sure that everybody in Wayne County understands the importance of the census, and that when we fill it out, once we turn it in, everybody will count and we'll get the funding that we need in our community within Wayne County.
Vicki, will you talk a little bit about the work you're doing in the city with a nod to how these folks in the audience can get involved, and then I would pose the same question at the state level to Carrie.
Sure. So the city of Detroit is doing a huge outreach effort and a communications effort. So number one, we've recruited about 120 neighborhood leaders. These are people who are presidents of their block clubs or their community groups. We've recruited 122 of them actually to be census captains. And what that means is they're going to be working their neighborhood to promote the census, talking to people about why it matters, attending block club meetings and other things in the neighborhood. They're going to be helping us out at churches where we're going to be doing Census Sundays, and schools where we have a whole schools outreach program in the Detroit Public Schools. Besides the census captains, and we're also paying them $200 every month from now until until July to help defray some of the costs of volunteering. We also have set up about 150 places all across the city. We are calling them Census Assistance Centers. In 50 of these places, we're going to have kiosks, like a tablet on a stand, that'll be census only, so you can go up to it, touch the screen, and the link to the census form online will pop up. So in addition to those 50 places, all Detroit public libraries, all of their public terminals will have a link to the census on them. All the computer labs in the city rec centers will pop up with the census page where you can click on and go to the form online. So this is the first online census in the history of the U.S. And it poses a lot of challenges for a city like Detroit, where only 55% of all the people have a regular internet connection. But you'll also be able to get the census form on your phone, and you'll also be able to call and fill out the census on the form. And in Detroit, 86% of all the people will get a paper form in the mail, in addition to a letter that says fill out the census online. So we're getting this information out. We have a really robust social media campaign. We've produced about 35 videos with people like, hey, talk about authentic messengers. So anybody here know of Cash Doll? Anybody know Cash Doll, Detroit rapper? Okay, two people. But people like Ice Revezo, who's another Detroit artist. We have folks from all walks of life that have recorded videos for us, and we're getting those out on social media. We have a faith video. So people from all different denominations across the city have come together to reach out to people of faith to fill out the census. So those are just some of the things that we're doing in Detroit to really mobilize folks, get the word out to fill out the census form.
Sure, a little bit about the state effort. City of Detroit created an amazing roadmap in terms of how to engage communities and got a head start on the state operation by far. So we've essentially evaluated and taken a look at that program and are attempting to promote that in communities across the state. So that type of engagement and outreach that Vicki just described, that is what we are trying to empower other communities to do across the state. So that's kind of when I talked about one of our buckets of work, regional collaboration. We want to make sure that we're sharing best practices. If City of Detroit created something for their water bills already, that was shared with the City of Grand Rapids. That's an example of creating a dynamic where if we're talking to each other, we can best utilize our resources. Two is the constituency bucket of work I mentioned. Community colleges, that's one of them. We have the Michigan Association of Community Colleges on our state committee. I met your president back in, I think, October. And we wanted to create a network and framework to provide information and census information to those constituencies throughout those networks, recognizing there's employees here with the community college, but also student organizations. So I would highlight that as one area where you could get involved as it relates to the census locally. And then your local complete count. I know the city of Dearborn has a local complete count committee, as well as Wayne County could all use participation in helping raise awareness. I'd also say mobilizing state government. So I mentioned some of the offices we have around the state. DHHS offices are one of those. They will each have a kiosk in the lobby where folks can come if they have other business to take care of within the office, and there's a line or a wait. They can go to that kiosk and fill out the census form as an example. So outside of that, coordinated and strategic coordination or communications. So while the Michigan Nonprofit Association, as well as Hague's Group and the U.S. Census Bureau is doing a huge push around paid media, TV, radio, etc. We want to help layer and fill any gaps to help promote again and cover our basis as it relates to that. And I'm actively looking for, how many of you guys are on Instagram? Yeah, follow us, MI Census. We got some content out there. Okay, how many are on TikTok? See? Okay. Can you guys start talking about the importance of the census on TikTok? I am like, this is one thing, this is another way you all could help very easily, and it's a constituency and a group of folks that we need to reach. So I'm happy to talk to you after this. Let me know if you're singing a song or dancing. I'm unfamiliar with TikTok, I'll come clean, but I want to utilize that venue to communicate with folks. So that's a little bit about our state work, but I would, the best way to get involved is through your community college, through your university, through your local complete count committee, and then we're here to support local communities to engage their residents.
Absolutely. And I know when we're wrapped here, Dr. Perry, I'm sure, can direct you at the college level, but then also with Jeremy over here at the county level, would be happy to talk to you afterwards if you want to see how to get engaged from census jobs to just getting the word out. And I apologize, you got stuck with Jim Martinez and not Cash Doll a week later. Hey, we've spoken in the past on some panels or at some sessions about trusted voices. And I think it's important for the students in this room to understand kind of their unique spot in this ecosystem when we're talking about the census and how, you know, we're trying to reach a complete count as all the esteemed panelists have highlighted, and that requires reaching everybody. And so all of us in our own right are a trusted voice for somebody. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think that's one of the most important points in this conversation. If someone tells you that the census is confidential, don't worry, no one's going to find out about you, it's not going to be the IRS or FBI or ICE, why would you believe that person? Or the question really is, who should be saying that so that you actually believe the person? I mean, I had a PhD student at Wayne State who said that when he was from Syria, that when the census would come to their home, the grandfather would say, we don't touch that. Because growing up in Syria, the grandfather, or whether it's Syria or Libya or Iraq or any number of countries where there are dictatorial regimes or oppressive governments, there is no culture of collaborating with the federal government. There is no sense of we can trust the government, and so let's fill it out. And so the grandfather would say, no, we don't do this. It's up to you to convince the elders in your family who might have a say in whether or not the family does this, to convince them that this should be done, that this is important, that this helps all of us. You are each a trusted voice. In your family, you're a trusted voice, as college students, maybe the first generation to go to college, you are a trusted voice among your friends as well, and the community of people that you hang out with. They need to know that they should fill out the census. This is truly a challenge for us. I've given speeches now, approaching 40 probably over the last few months. I've met with, for example, the Council of Imams, because imams are trusted voices in their communities too. Detroit's doing an effort with ministers in the city of Detroit, because church leaders are trusted voices. Community activists are trusted voices. Teachers, professors are trusted voices. You are trusted voices. And you need to realize the role that you play in this effort. And it's a critical role to convince people who otherwise have no reason to trust that the census is important, to convince them that it is so. And that, I think, is one of the core challenges that we face across the state in every city that we're dealing with the census.
Yeah, agreed. We're kind of running up against kind of the conclusion, but I wanted to give each of our panelists, and we'll start with Daniel, I wanted to give each of our panelists an opportunity if there's kind of one key takeaway or parting message you'd have for the folks today. Daniel, if you want to start with you, and then we'll go across the table.
Well, seeing that it's Black History Month, I want to start off by saying a quote that Malcolm X once said. He said, "Of all of our studies, history is most qualified to reward our research." So if we really wanted to have a sincere appreciation of the census, we would have to go back to right around 1787. My people didn't come over here because they were seeking an opportunity for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. My people came over here in the belly of ships, and there was always a question about their citizenship and about their freedom. And in 1787, there was a compromise from a state representative out of Pennsylvania who deemed that African Americans would be represented as 3/5 of a citizen. This was because at that time, the population of the United States was heavily weighted in the South. And in the event that Southern or African Americans were considered a whole human being, then the weight of representation would have been placed in the South. And the South would have dictated the entire future of the United States of America. And our country would be very different today. The question of slavery, the question of the Civil War, the question of whether or not Abraham Lincoln would have been the president of the United States would have been in the air and quite different. So when we look at that history and understand that the census truly dictated the entire future of our country, we have to take that into context and consideration today and understand that it is so critical that we engage in the census because, as the gentleman in the previous panel stated, there is power in numbers. When we go out, fill out our census, when we vote on election day, that means that the government hears from us and understands what our plight is so that we'll have our proper funding for federal aid, for student loans, have proper funding for our community college and higher education so that we won't have to be paying high prices in terms of education. It controls every aspect of our lives, from education to WIC to all types of other things that impact us on a day-to-day basis. So when you leave here today, understand that you have to go out into our community in Wayne County, whether you're in Dearborn, Detroit, Hamtramck, or Highland Park. Tell somebody about the census. Tell someone about what you heard today and motivate and encourage people to engage because everybody counts.
In a closing statement, I think everyone has a responsibility. You have a responsibility to yourself, to your family. But to me, I think everyone has a responsibility to their community as well. And the census is about that responsibility. It's about how it affects your community. It's about all the money that from federal school loans to school lunches to supplemental nutrition to Head Start. Everything is tied to the census. It may not be about you and what you need and your family's health care, but it is about our community. And I've always believed that the more privileged you are, the more responsibility you have to do something with that, with the availability that you have, whether in time or resources or money. You are all college students. You are one of the privileged classes in our society. You have an additional responsibility to your community. I do this for the census, not because of any other reason than I feel a responsibility to my community in Detroit and to the state that I live in, Michigan. I hope all of you feel that sense of responsibility. I hope all of you, when you leave here, carry that with you. And I hope all of you use that to make a difference for the census. Thank you.
Lots of mics. I'm gonna, I think before the last panel and the last two speakers definitely tapped into this is us, this is our community. And, but I do wanna highlight the actual questions, what the census form actually asks. Okay, name, age, telephone, gender, race, ethnicity, number of people living in your household, relationship to you, do you own or rent? That's it. I'm guessing that many of you probably have more on your social media accounts than are actually asked on the census form. So 10 minutes for 10 years. It's only going to take 10 minutes, and this impacts our communities for the next 10 years. So it's been a privilege to be here. Thank you.
So my takeaway is you are the most important messengers right now. So when that form comes, whether you're living with your parents or a relative, or you're living in a house with a group of people, that form's going to come to where you live. And we need you to make sure that they don't throw it away, all right? It's going to come in the mail beginning March 12th, right? And we have until mid-July to fill out the form. You can do it online or paper form if you get that. But just make sure that whoever gets it in the mail doesn't think it's junk mail and throws it away, all right? Because that's throwing away in Detroit $5,000 worth of federal money per person per year, right? That's like saying Medicaid, Head Start, all these programs. That's what it comes to for everyone that's not counting. So make sure when you get it, it's filled out and it counts everybody that's living in that house. Again, whether you're living with a bunch of people, or you're living with your relatives, whether you're sleeping on the couch of your grandma's house because you can't afford any place else, you are counted at your grandma's house, all right? So we just need to make sure that you take this message back, because the census is an historical record of the US. And in 72 years, that's 72 years when they release your name at this particular address where you lived in 2020, it's your grandkids and your great-grandkids. I know it's hard to think that far ahead, but they're going to be the ones that are going to want to access those records, right? So don't erase yourself. Make sure that you are counted so that long after most of us are in this room are gone, there's a record of where we were in 2020, where our people lived then, that we can go back, just like we have gone back to 1940 and generations before us. When they look at finding your roots, they were able to go back and find people. Make sure that you're there for them, all right? And make sure that form is filled out and that we count everyone. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Everybody counts. Just keep saying that over and over. We all count. I'd like to take a second just to thank our panelists. You know, a lot of them, you know, like myself, we work for bosses, most of us who, you know, they're in the limelight, and rightly so, they get the applause, but these folks are the ones who are, and their bosses will tell you, I'm not saying anything out of school or out of turn, but their bosses will tell you, you know, they're in there every day putting their nose to the grindstone, and they're the ones who are committed to this. It's so important, and it's their passion and commitment to what Detroit, what Wayne County, and what Michigan is going to look like when we do this again in 2030. And we hope we can count on you for your help. So once again, thank you. Give yourself and the panel a round of applause. And if you just hang with us for a couple minutes as we transition out and grab a photo, we've got a presentation for you.
Wayne County has approximately 1.7 million residents and is home to a large population of Salvation and Lantern residents. Among those,
Maybe don't do it at the end.
sorry guys. This way. Perfect, thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks again. Before we wrap up for the break, I wanted to show you a presentation. And when I talked about public service and the type of stuff you can do in government when you're not the elected office holder, this is an example of it. At Wayne County, we are one of the most diverse counties in the country. We're the most populous county in Michigan with 1.7 million people. We are the 19th most populous county in the country. And one of the things we're very proud of is our diversity. We truly think it is our strength, both economically, socially, culturally, just having a cornucopia of ideas and experiences that we can merge together. So one of the things we were able to do through our Wayne United program was put together a report that shows the impact of new Americans in our immigrant population. And so we just wanted to share this piece we put together that shows the economic impact of new Americans.
Wayne County has approximately 1.7 million residents and is home to a large population of Arab, Salvation, and Latin American residents. Among those, the top 5 countries for immigrants living in the county are Yemen, Mexico, India, Lebanon, and Bangladesh. At just 9.4% of the population, immigrants continue to have an outsized impact on the economy and tax base. This makes Wayne County Michigan's most populous and diverse county. With just over 164,000 immigrants, that's a lot. Between 2012 and 2017, the overall population of the county decreased by 2.2%. Without growth in immigrants, the decline in the county's population would have been greater, falling by 3.9%. In 2017, immigrant residents contributed $10.5 billion to the county's gross domestic product. Immigrant households earned $4.3 billion and had a total spending power of $3.2 billion after taxes. That's money spent supporting jobs and businesses in our communities. Immigrants contributed nearly $740 million to federal taxes, $345 million to state and local taxes, $430.5 million to Social Security, and $110.6 million to Medicare. In 2017, foreign residents made up 9.4% of the county's overall population, though they represented 10.7% of its employed labor force and 21.4% of its STEM workers. 16.3% of immigrants represent a share of entrepreneurs, compared to 6% of the U.S. born population. This immigrant workforce helps companies keep jobs in U.S. soil, preserving 7,564 local manufacturing jobs that would have otherwise vanished or moved elsewhere. When it comes to education, new Americans are critical to developing an educated and highly skilled workforce. 30.4% of the county's immigrants aged 25 or older held a bachelor's degree or higher in 2017, compared to 21.7% of U.S. born. And 14.6% held an advanced degree, compared to 8.7%. 5,279 of these international students living as temporary residents supported 1,172 local jobs and spent $150.2 million in the 2017-18 academic year. It's clear, the focus towards getting a proper education benefits the county in return. Immigrants and refugees are a driving economic force in Wayne County. They create jobs, pay taxes, start businesses, and strengthen the workforce. The data is many, and the economic case is clear. A welcoming Wayne County is a stronger, more prosperous county. A welcoming America is a stronger, more prosperous America.
Thank you. And if you could just do me a favor before Dr. Perry takes over for conclusion. One very small thing you can do is go to either waynecounty.com or Wayne County's Facebook page and find that video. A lot of what we're hearing in the national rhetoric makes us very upset as representing the most diverse county, and you hear a lot of stereotypes and misconceptions. And if you would, feel free to share that video and help get the facts out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, for moderating and being on that panel and the video. And Wayne County will send this link out to all our students. So, real quick, there is pizza and pop outside for you guys to grab it and come back in here in about 10, 15 minutes. We're going to reconvene. And then MDICE Group is taking over for the afternoon. So we're going to have a keynote by Representative Abdullah Hammoud. So get some food, stretch your legs, plan on be back in here in about 10 minutes. Okay, thanks.
Is that what you wanted to happen? Okay, good. Good afternoon. How is everyone doing today? I see a lot of faces that I saw earlier this morning. Thank you all for sticking around on a Friday when it's, is it still snowing outside? No? Okay, good, good. My name's Russ Cavaloon. I work here at Henry Ford College, and I'm glad to have most of you here. In fact, I'm glad to have all of you here, but I'm glad to have most of you back from this morning. And we're going to go into now a presentation from a friend of mine and your representative, and I'm going to introduce him in just a second, but I do want to plug a couple items for you one more time. One would be, of course, please do register to vote. This is one of the most important things you can do as a citizen, and it really should be seen as your civic duty. We've had a lot of discussions about that this morning and yesterday, and it really is your opportunity to make your voice heard. So please do take advantage of what is, as Secretary Benson mentioned last night, it's some of the easiest ways now to vote, and in contrast with simply what I had to vote every election before this election, and certainly when I was your age. So please do register to vote. And then second, please do take it very seriously to help us pass the message of how important it is to take part in the census. I won't repeat everything except to say the census is our one time in a decade. One time every 10 years, we get an opportunity to show how many people the government has to represent here. And you are inclusive of those people, but certainly your network is. Your friends, your family, anyone around you, please help us get the message out that it is safe, and in fact, it is extraordinarily important to take part in the census. Okay, now, how many of you all know who Abdullah Hammoud is? Okay, all right. Look at that. Abdullah's a friend of mine. I'm going to say just a few things about him and why we're so proud of him here at Henry Ford College. I can see it looks like even more than half of you all know who he is, so I won't go into deep detail, but I'll just say, you may not know that Abdullah did attend Henry Ford College. I think his mom attended Henry Ford College too. You may not know that Abdullah is the son of immigrants. You also may not know that Abdullah Hammoud is your state representative. That means he is in the Michigan House of Representatives. He is a graduate of Fordson High School. And when we, as a college, were asking for the state to invest in this campus, this very campus, we wanted to expand the technical building. And we asked for over $7 million to help us expand that. And we had been trying year after year after year to get the legislature to fund that. I can tell you when I became president over a year and a half ago, I went and the first legislator I met with was Abdullah, and I said, I need help to get this funding through. And it was in less than a year, he was able, with the help of Sylvia Santana, to get that legislation passed. So this is a person who comes from your community, has attended the college that you attend if you're here at Henry Ford College with me, and he has helped bring resources back to this college. And we're going to start building on that project in less than 6 months. So there's a lot of different things I could say about Abdullah, except none would be more important than to say he actually advocates for this college. And that's, of course, what I'm so interested in. But you were probably interested in other things. You may be interested in where he comes from and why he thinks public service is important and what's in the future or what is in his past. And it's rare that you have a representative, a leader who's from where you're from and can talk to you about his background and his history. And I'm sure he'll share some of that. Please do. He's one of the most open and one of the most transparent leaders I've ever met. So if you do get a chance to say hello to him today, please do so. And if you didn't get that chance today and you have a question about anything really, he is willing and will respond to you if you reach out to his office. So without any further ado, it is my pleasure and distinct honor to welcome back to the stage my friend, your representative, Abdullah Hammoud.
Good afternoon. Okay, you guys saw me earlier. I said good morning. Same response. We'll do that one more time. Good afternoon. Thank you. And like the cheers and stuff, I hope somebody caught that on camera. I need to send it to my wife. She thinks I have a very boring job. So try to show her otherwise. Yes, perfect. Please crop and send. And we'll send it over to her. So I have the privilege of the next few minutes. I know this is supposed to be a 20-minute speech. I rarely give a talk over 8 or 9 minutes. I get bored of myself after that point, and nothing really interesting to say after about the 9-minute, 16-second mark. And so it won't go longer than that. But I wanted to speak to you is how I got into the position that I'm in. I'll give you the story of my background, kind of my life story of how I got to where I am today. It might be relevant, you might be familiar for many of you who are either immigrants or children of immigrants or grew up in a very low-income household, because that's kind of the story that I share. You know, I grew up not too far from here. I grew up in the east side of Dearborn. I grew up with, you know, a bunch of funny-looking kids who all had this dream of being financially successful. And we define success as having the financial means of paying all the bills that came in the mailbox. Because as I said, my parents had immigrated here, my friends' parents had all immigrated here, and we didn't have much of anything growing up, but we had one another. And my mother and my father, who never had a college education at the time, always instilled in me that it would be education that would provide me with my pathway to success. And education is what they preach. And this is coming from individuals, again, who never had more than a high school graduation at the time. And education was something I succeeded at. It was something that I was actually good at. I was very book smart. And I had this lofty dream of becoming a pediatric oncologist. Obviously, I never made it to med school. And failure is a whole nother thing that I can go on and speak to. But it's failure. Failure is really at the foundational level for why I am where I am today. But me and this group of friends, we came up with a simple mantra: 6 figures by 26. It sounds like a Drake lyric. You're gonna hear it in his next album that he's dropping, 6 figures by 26. I think he was doing, 26 million by 26, but we had, lower goals. And that mantra came from this idea of we wanted to provide for our family. And we knew the only way we could do that is if we were financially successful, then we can use the means that we generate to provide not only for our household, but lift up all of our relatives as well. That's how we thought, and that's how we felt. And so as I told you, education was that pathway, and I was great at it. At 19, I was graduating at the University of Michigan Dearborn. By 21, I graduated with my master's as one of the youngest graduates in the school's history at the School of Public Health in Ann Arbor. And that gave me 5 years to achieve that job, that gave me that salary, that would provide me with the means to provide. And I pursued it like no other. For the longest time, I thought it would be medical school, but I applied to over 150 schools over a 3-year period. And not one of them thought that I was good enough to enter their program. And let me tell you, it's a bit of a payback being in the position that I am now. You have those medical schools visiting you, asking for resources for their campuses, and I still have the letters of them telling me no. So I just reword it and hand it back to them. But at 21, I started working at the University of Michigan Health System. And for the next 4 years, I'd work in the healthcare consulting field. At the age of 25, with having only like 10 months left to try to reach that goal, because it was something I held very near and dear to me. At 25, in the month of October, I was actually interviewing for the job that would have paid me over $120,000 a year with a signing bonus of over $30,000 a year. It was something that I had never dreamed of, and my parents never thought it would ever be real. It would be the first of its kind. I was the first to graduate from graduate school in my family. I was one of the first to get a college degree, and I would be one of the first to ever pass that 6-figure threshold as it pertained to an income. As I was interviewing, my older brother and my best friend passed away unexpectedly. He was 27 years, 9 months, and 25 days young. And if you've ever had a loss like that, your best friend, your brother, whoever it might be, at that point in time, you ask yourself, what is my purpose? I was pursuing this goal that had an end date of 26. If I had achieved that job, I would have achieved everything I'd ever dreamt of for 26 years. But what happens at 27? If you pass away at 27, what does that actually mean? When you have a death like that, when you're actually forced to face life and look it in the eye and answer that question, you begin to think differently. Now, my brother, and I can talk for the whole 20 minutes and then some about my brother, but my brother was my biggest advocate. He was that type of individual that made you feel as if you can grab the stars. All you had to do was reach out. And so I told myself, what if I became an advocate for my community in the same way that he was an advocate for me? And so at 25, having that job before me, I actually decided to leave my whole career in the healthcare industry that I had worked so hard to get to. And instead of pursuing what was my passion, I decided to go find my purpose. And so at January of 2016, just 3 months after my brother passed away, we announced this run for office. And it wasn't easy. You can imagine it was the most difficult year of my family's life, but it was something that I felt, and my mentors at the time who had approached me with this idea were there to support us all the way through. On that campaign trail, and Zainab here is one of the ones who ran my campaign at the time. On that campaign trail, I learned more about myself in those 11 months than I thought I had known about myself in 26 years. I understood what it meant to serve a community, to go out there and knock on doors and to actually allow people the opportunity to be heard, for them to come up with what your political platform should be, and not the other way around. Not a single individual telling you all what we should focus on, but in reverse. And public service turned into this idea of if we work together as a community, organizing, mobilizing, advancing efforts outside of just the legislature where you're supposed to be locked into. If you lift up the entirety of this community, you undoubtedly lift up yourself. If this whole community succeeds, there is no way that you do not succeed. That was the mentality and the mantra that we had. And we were successful. Poll after poll after poll told us that we would lose that election. I recall the first poll we did, we were in second place, down by 7 points. This is 3 months outside of the primary. But if you recall, also in 2016, we had the Orlando Pulse shooting down in Florida, where an individual with a name like mine committed an atrocious act. Nothing to do with religion, nothing that any sane person would commit. But the amount of animosity that we received at the doors had skyrocketed. I never told you, but my first master's was in public health with a focus on biostatistics, epidemiology, and genetics. Basically, I was really good at math. And so we actually calculated how often was it that we received some sort of racist trope at each door we knocked. And it was about 1 in 15 to 20 doors. Somebody had something to tell us. My own neighbor, and I'll never forget this, 2 blocks from where I lived, as I knocked his door, I said, "Hi, my name is Abdullah Hamoud. I'm running for state rep. I'm your neighbor. I live over on Mohawk Street." He stopped, looked at the piece of mail I handed to him, looked back at me, and said, "I'm disgusted that you're my neighbor," and slammed the door in my face. This wasn't a Republican. This was somebody that voted Democrat 97% of the time, which also opened up my eyes to the idea that bigotry is not confined to just one side of the aisle. And that the most radical thing that we actually have running abundant throughout the states is known as willful ignorance. The idea that you don't want to learn from your neighbor, that you don't want to open your eyes and accept facts to be facts, and that you choose to be ignorant. You choose to be bigoted and filled with hate. And that was true of our campaign the entirety that we received this type of feedback. After the Pulse shooting, we did another poll out of the fear that something had shifted, that this incident, this atrocious incident that happened in Orlando, Florida, was impacting a local state election in Dearborn, Michigan. We went from being 4 points behind the front runner to being 17 points behind the front runner. And we took a step back and we asked ourselves, is this something that we think can still be done? And we said, why not? We had made it this far. Not only was it that we were facing the bigotry and the pushback from those who were ignorant, but we'd also face lashback from members of my own community, the Arab American community, the Muslim American community, for having decided to have the courage to run. In the days that we ran, I can't tell you how many people approached me and said, "You will never win with a name like Abdullah. It's never been done before." And we pushed back and we said, Abdullah is as American a name as any other. And if I have to change my name to run for office in the city of Dearborn, where is it in this country that you can run with a name like Abdullah? The suggestion was to run as Abe Hamoud. A very non-controversial name. Hamoud Hammond, it might confuse you there. You might get away with it. You don't look too Arab, kind of light-skinned. You don't have the accent. But we decided that if we could not run as authentic and genuine as we were, if I can't run based on my own name and based on who I am, what precedent will we set if we were successful or not successful in that election? The week leading up to the election, now we're a primary, you have a primary and you have a general. The primary is in August, the general is in November. In the primary, you run against fellow Democrats to determine who the Democrat will be, and you face the Republican challenger in November. In the week leading up to the election, the day before actually, I went and I had visited the cemetery to visit my brother at the time. And at this point, all signs were showing that we were not going to come out on top. We had done a poll the week before the election. We were down about 10 points. And we knew that what we were trying to accomplish was more than likely not going to be accomplished. At the cemetery that day, I looked up and I said, God, give me a sign that what I'm doing is right. And in that moment, there was a shooting star that passed by. And it sounds like something of movies. Like I'm trying to share a feel-good story. But it was one of the realest moments I ever had. Now, it could have been circumstance. It could have been coincidence. But again, when you're in that position, when you lost somebody so near and dear to you, and when you're praying the way that we were all praying, you took that sign to mean everything and we held on to it. The election came and the election passed. And when the results came out, we won by 10 percentage points in a city where no Arab American and no Muslim American had ever won before. But that was only the beginning. When I made it to Lansing, you think that you're amongst 110 of the brightest and best. That's it. I'm a state representative. They should respect the title. They should respect the pathway that it took for me to get here. But when I went around to introduce myself, the only thing people cared about is what was the letter before your name? Are you a Democrat or Republican? And what district did you represent? Nobody bothers to ask, what did it take for you to get here? Tell me about who you are and what it is that you fight for and that you stand for. We lack civility in our political process. We lack civility day in and day out throughout communities, throughout conversations. So when I made it there, as much as I tried to befriend and reach out and get to know individuals, all that mattered was the letter and the district number. But I would ask you all to imagine the world where that wasn't the case. What would it mean if that you bonded with an individual that you wanted to work with over the ideas that brought you to where you were? Over a shared understanding for what it meant to overcome life's obstacles. To understand that growing up in a poor household in the city of Dearborn is the same as growing up in a poor household in the city of Howell, or in Detroit, or Hamtramck, or somewhere in the UP. That you share a similar set of values and principles. And that it might not be your policy solution that addresses the issue at hand, and it might not be your policy solution that addresses the issue at hand, but you have half the solution and you have half the solution. And if you're able to put your differences aside for just a moment, you would actually see that the pieces would come together to provide the best possible solution for all the residents in the state of Michigan. That's what a civil society would look like and acts like. And that's what I try to do each and every day. Now, this being my fourth year, I've learned a few things. I've had the privilege of bringing over 60 of my representatives down to the city of Dearborn. Democrat, Republican, extreme, all the way to the right and all the way to the left. And I have determined that more than more common than I'd like to admit. I have more in common with some of my Republican colleagues than I do with my Democrats. And it's actually fostered much growth, and it's allowed us to all be successful. The first two bills I passed in the legislature were actually bipartisan bills that I worked on with one of the most conservative members of the House, Pastor Noble. Now this, and I'm going to sidetrack for just a moment just to share this one story. Here was a very conservative pastor who most people thought, don't approach, don't have conversation with, you will never get anything done with this individual. On top of that, I was the first Arab and Muslim he had ever met, and he lived in Livonia. That's about a 15-minute drive. For many of my colleagues, I realized that I was the first Arab or Muslim they had ever met. I'm the only Muslim out of 148, unfortunately, and one of two Arab Americans who, after 2 years from now, we're hoping that we will at least have one voice. Pastor Noble and I never agreed on gun policy, but we tried something daring. I've never shot a gun before. I said, Pastor, why don't you take me to a gun range, a shooting range? You teach me how to shoot, and we'll debate gun policy. He agreed. Now, I was smart. I brought with me my fiance at the time. I was not looking for a Dick Cheney moment where an accident was going to happen at the shooting range, my face gets blown off, and Abdullah Hamoud gets lost at a Westland shooting range with Pastor Noble. So I brought her along with me. And during that 2 hours, we never agreed on a single thing pertaining to gun policy. Absolutely not even banning of bump stocks, which is what allows a semi-automatic turn into a fully automatic used in several mass shootings. We could not agree on that simple point. The following weeks, Pastor Noble, though, and I developed such a strong friendship based on that one occasion of us going out, that till this day, my wife checks in on him, and he checks in on her. And we ask one another almost every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday that we're in Lansing about one each other's families. The following weeks, we actually put a package of bills together that would advance the healthcare for those suffering from tuberculosis. And it advanced all the way through, and that was the first bill I signed into law, with an individual I had nothing in common with just a few weeks prior, because we never took the time to get to know one another. We simply isolated ourselves due to the letter or the district number behind our names. I say all this to say that we tend to be a society that quickly judges those around us before getting to know them. And for many of you sitting in the audience today, you might have an idea of the track that you want to pursue. It might be your passion. It might be something that you've held on to since you were young, like I was. I can tell you my mother was not the happiest when I told her I wanted to run for office. For anybody who is the child of immigrants or an immigrant yourself, you know what it means to an Arab or Muslim mother to be a doctor. It's everything. My wife is a physician, and my mom yesterday told me, don't anger my doctor. She came with me to the swearing-in ceremony in Lansing, the only woman who wore hijab in all of Lansing that day. She hugged me and she cried, and she whispered to me that day, she said, I'm extremely proud of you. Although I would have been more proud if you were a doctor. I'm not even making that up. Till this day, she's asked me if I consider going back to medical school. For parents who had fled nations where politics had led to civil strife and forced them out of their homeland, the idea that their son with a name like Abdullah Hussein Hamoud would ever run for office was not something they ever imagined. And it wasn't something they ever accepted when I approached them. My father and my mother looked me in the face and said, no, we don't support this endeavor. However, we know you're strong-headed and strong-willed. And that we know we can't overcome, and we're not going to stop you. As you sit in your seats, as you go back to class, as you figure out what's next, understand that you may plan your life for the next 30 years. But God is the ultimate of planners. And you may be pursuing your passion, but I implore you to pursue your purpose. And you might not know what it is today, but I have a feeling that each and every single one of you will one day be faced with what that purpose is and have the opportunity to either accept it or work against it. For me, it happened to be public service, something I never imagined I'd ever delve into, but I couldn't be happier. It's given me new opportunities, new friendships, brotherhoods and sisterhoods. And it's opened a whole nother slew of opportunities that I am just patiently waiting for. I no longer think about what I'm going to do 10 years from now. I focus on the now, focus on those around me, focus on my community, trying to do what I can in the time that I have. And I can't tell you how grateful I've been for that awakening. Unfortunately, it was a devastating set of circumstances that led me here. And more times than not, I can't tell you I've tried to run away from it. But ultimately coming back out of the spirit of my brother and spirit of all those who've entrusted me with the opportunity to serve. So my message to you is simple. You can fail a dozen times. You can fail 150 times. And it doesn't mean that you failed in life. You might not know the direction in which you're heading into, but it doesn't mean that you're lost. If you're steadfast and you hold all that you hold dear close to you, I bet that you will come out to be successful. And that word success and how you define it will change with time. It might be 6 figures by 26 when you're a funny looking kid running a playground. When you're turning 30, as I will be, it would have completely evolved, and it's okay. Don't be scared. So we get out there, fail, and fail forward, and hopefully you'll succeed while you're at it. Thank you.
This group. What we're going to be doing now is Nezreen and Ilias and Noor. They must be in A, B, and C. Are they back there? There they are. Okay. So we're breaking them into A, B, and C, right? Okay. So you got the cards? Okay. So we are going to break into small groups, into discussions. And they have a 3x5 card with an A, a B, or a C on them. Okay? And as you go out the hall, you're going to go into the Rosenau rooms down the hall. Whatever's on your card is the room you go to. Okay? And then they're going to give you instructions in those rooms. Thank you.
think I'm the trainer, Jeff and I can train this together. So you actually do the same thing, because like Jamie on Johnson's here, this work with Joe and it's the same thing I said. The idea with reps, any of that. Yeah, yeah, go in there, just, you know, and say hi, say where you're from, and, you know, question, and then, you know, and Rick can actually teach you around and introduce you through real briefly, and then. Okay, so very informal in that regard, we'll try to have them really talk to each other. Yeah. Okay, great. Go ahead, find your stars. You know what I did? I just saw him a while ago. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're better there. So what is it? What is it? Right, so she. So wait, so what does it? We have a slight. Okay.